Hello, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for coming to our webinar. I'm Rob Carrillo from the EOSC Hub Communications team, representing Trust IT Services. Before we begin, I'm just going to take you through the interface. So you have a sidebar where you're able to interact with us. That will be particularly handy for questions. So regarding the questions, I suggest that you please hold them until the end of the presentation, in case they are answered during the course of the session. For the question and answer portion, you can raise your hand. There's a functionality there where you can indicate to us that you're raising your hand, and you'll be unmuted so that you can state your own question. And now I see that almost everyone is in, so I would like to pass the floor to my colleague, who will now introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Rob. This is Diego Scardasci. I work for the AGI Foundation, and I'm one of the two co-chair of the Activity Management Board. I would like to shortly give you some information, some background information about this webinar. EOSC Hub is one of the main EOSC implementation project, and the project reached the half of its life. So we are starting to have mature output, and then we would like to start to, from one side, share with all the EOSC relevant stakeholders the output of our project, and from the other side, we would like to get feedback to have the possibility to change something if needed to improve the work we are currently doing on this project. So for this reason, we are organizing some webinars. The first one is today. It's about the EOSC Service Management System and the EOSC Service Portfolios. Tomorrow we'll have another webinar on the technical architecture. And in addition, after this webinar, we will open a feedback collection. We will provide you more information about that. That will start next week on the topics of the webinars that we are organizing. Now, I'd like to introduce you Owen Appleton. He works also for the AGI Foundation. He's the EOSC Hub Service Portfolio Manager and Innovation Manager. And today, during this webinar, we'll describe you the EOSC Hub proposal for the EOSC Service Management System with a particular focus on the structure we envisaged for the EOSC Service Portfolio and on the onboarding process for new service providers that are willing to onboard the new services within the EOSC service catalog. So, Owen.
Thanks, Diego. And hello, everyone. Thank you for attending. I can see there's quite a lot of you there. As Diego kindly said, I'm the Service Portfolio Manager for EOSC Hub. Certainly, that's the role which really relates to the work today. And I'll try and explain to you what the service management system is and what our proposal for it is. Just to let you know that we have to do some explanation around service management systems because I'm not sure that everyone has the same background. So there is some more basic information before we get into the details of what the EOSC Hub is doing. Hopefully this is of interest for everyone, but I just wanted you to be aware of that. Okay, let's get started. First, we're talking about an EOSC service management system as proposed by EOSC Hub. So what exactly is the problem? What are we managing and for who? This is just should we say, my view of the landscape as we see it right now. We know that in Europe, there are a wide range of researchers organized in different ways, individual researchers, research groups, large research communities, which are all trying to push forward science and research at a European scale. At the same time, there are also a whole bunch of providers. There come in different flavors. There are commercial providers, there are thematic providers, very specialist providers doing something incredibly specific, and ones that are more generic or providing infrastructure. They do certainly talk to each other. There are relationships and services being delivered across Europe, but the way they talk to each other is relatively partial. And a lot of the time it's based on what services people are aware of and understand and know from colleagues or from their past work. It can be difficult sometimes for people to break through, even if their services are incredibly valuable, if they don't have a real way to get to researchers. And equally, it can be hard for researchers to discover new kinds of services available to them and really benefit from them if they don't already have some connection to them. So we need something to assist this. And this is what we in EOSC Hub are calling the hub of EOSC. And this is what we're trying to provide at least an early version of for the EOSC community. Basically a mediation layer that sits between researchers and providers that doesn't try and get in the way really, but tries to make the relationship between them easier, to make it easier for providers to find customers, customers to find providers, and increase the value for both groups. Within our project, which is a limited term project, so we're not trying to do the whole of EOSC, we are really like a beta test for the practical implementation of this hub and bringing together providers and customers. We have a pleasantly complicated diagram of how we work, but I just want to highlight that this diagram reflects just the reality that I've already been explaining to you. It includes a customer domain at the top here. It just says customers, but we understand that there are many different kinds of customers. And then at the bottom, there are a whole loads of different kinds of service. There are specialized services, baseline services, thematic services. Some are provided by the partners of the project, some aren't. And between the two, there is this hub concept. And within this hub, specifically, there is this dark part, which is essentially the service management system. So the service management system here is a crucial component in how we glue together customers and the providers in this EOSC landscape. And we are trying to provide an early version of this to test it, to deploy it, to be taken up later by EOSC as a whole. So hopefully this gives you some context for the problem we're talking about today. How do we do this? But before we do that, we're going to have to go back a little bit. And for those of you that don't have a background in service management, I'll try and keep this relatively brief. I want to explain what it is and why it makes sense. First, I'd like to give you some idea of what IT service management is in research. I want to give you these ideas because this is something I've been doing for about 10 years now. And I have to say, when I started talking about IT service management in research, I was one of a vanishingly small number of people doing it. I was involved in a couple of projects that were on this topic, but it was a hard sell sometimes, trying to push formal management that seemed quite commercial into the research sector. However, things have changed since then. I mean, I started at the end of FP5, I think, and then FP6. We're now in Horizon 2020. There has been a change over time from projects which delivered products and publications and outputs that could just be taken by someone else, and the current era where really we all talk about services. This is also matched by a change in the European industrial sector, where we definitely have a service economy rather than a product economy or an industrial economy at this stage. There's also been a big focus on sustainability. It used to be, in some ways, everyone always wanted to know what were your key outputs, but their sustainability was not something that funding agencies, whether European or national or thematic, was as bothered about as they are now. Now everyone really wants you to explain how do you make these services sustainable, partly because with a service, you have to keep providing it. It's not something you can just deliver at the end of a project and walk away. And this picture on the right that says we are now service providers, this is a version of a slide I used to give, which said, you're not researchers anymore, you're service providers. And it was not a popular slide. It was an important one, but I used to get very negative reactions to putting it up. But I wanted to prompt the conversation. Now it's largely accepted in the field we all work in, I think. So these are the sort of changes we've seen. Everything is now commoditized as a digital service. XaaS, anything as a service, is now commonplace. Even if people are downloading apps to their smartphones, they're rarely working in isolation. They're nearly always connected to some back-end service, as I think people discover when they have no mobile phone signal quite quickly, nothing works. However, there is some lack of information or background in this, even if it's accepted, because many of the people working in our industry didn't get this sort of training when they were starting their careers, and are only now picking up a lot of the skills you need for service provision. Okay, so moving forward, what is then service management? This is actually a version of some training material that me and my colleagues use quite often, so you may have some of you seen it before, I hope not, but it gives a decent start on service management. So, IT service management, there are two components to this. There's the IT service and the management. IT services are typically involving two parties. There is a provider and a customer. the provider does something for the customer. And a term you often find when you're talking about service management is how is this service described? And that's often captured in something called a service level agreement, an SLA. This is probably the most significant document you hear people talking about in IT service management, and the first contact a lot of people have with service management. From the point of view of the customer, what is it that this service does that they're provided? It creates some sort of value for them. And the value can be in many different forms, but one useful way to think about it is it's either giving them some new ability, maybe they can process a new file format, maybe they can work on using a new bunch of algorithms, or it removes constraints. So maybe now they can process much faster, or they can store different kinds of data which they couldn't before. But these are just two ways of trying to conceptualize the value that a service provides for a customer. This value, however, also can be broken down in another way, which is more significant for IT service management, into the utility a service has for a customer and the warranty it offers. We sometimes say that things with a good utility are fit for purpose and with a good warranty are fit for use. The example I like best here is a bus service. So the utility of a bus service, if this were in a classroom, I would probably ask someone what they thought it was, but in this case, I'll have to provide an answer, is to get you from A to B. So if a bus gets you from outside your house to your office, then its utility is fulfilled. The warranty is how it does that. If a bus service shows up somewhere between every 5 minutes and every 2 hours, and you don't know which it'll be, then it doesn't matter whether it gets you to your office or not. It's not particularly useful or valuable to you. The warranty of it is not sufficient for it to be valuable to you because you don't know whether you'll get into the office on time. Now, there's lots of different ways we can think about this, but this is perhaps a basic one. So these warranty aspects, this is where IT service management focuses. And we typically think about things like availability, capacity, security, and continuity as warranty aspects for services. So capacity, for instance, with a bus service, it doesn't matter if the bus is there on time every day if it's always full when it arrives at your stop. Having lived in London for a long time, this is something I can talk about from personal experience. It doesn't matter if the utility is there if there's no warranty. So this is some idea of what we talk about when we talk about IT services. On the other side, the management part, there's just a couple of things I would like to focus on here. One is an idea you see all the way through IT service management, which is continual service improvement. This means that you don't do everything at once. The idea is you introduce IT service management bit by bit, try and make improvements and keep building on those improvements. And the improvement never really stops. It stabilizes over time, but it never stops because there is no fixed end goal for service management. The idea is you make your services the best they can be. And even if you've optimized them, the world will change around you and you'll have to make new changes. And another aspect which is related to this is something you'll often see called the Deming cycle or the PDCA cycle, plan, do, check, act. And this is how IT service management is deployed. Typically, you'll make some plans to do something. You'll then implement it, you'll do it. You'll check what the effect was, and then you'll act on that information to try and understand how you can do things better next time, and then you'll make a new set of plans. So when we talk about IT service management, certainly in the context of EOSC and EOSC Hub, we're not doing it all at once. This is a big, complicated set of structures which can be really valuable to us, but we have to do it incrementally and through continual improvement. Okay, so this is the basics of IT service management. What about a service management system? I can give you a definition here. The overall management system that controls and supports management of services within an organization or federation. So this is the structure we use to do IT service management. And there's quite a neat diagram which I think shows how it breaks down. This is an example or a kind of schema for a service management system, and it operates at 3 levels at the same time. At the top, you have a policy level, governance level, where you're setting goals. You're setting maybe security goals, privacy goals, goals for how you handle incidents, things like this. But this is telling you what it is you're trying to achieve rather than how you're going to do it. In the middle, you have a control level, as we call it, where we find IT service management processes. And these are really the engines of a service management system and of IT service management, breaking down things into processes. IT service management is a process-oriented approach. So you try and understand all of your activities as a set of processes which each has some inputs, has a bunch of activities to do something with those inputs, and then has some outputs. And then these processes relate together to build your larger structure. Obviously, within that, you also have an operational level, which really breaks things down to actual procedures, to steps that people go through on a day-to-day basis. But that is more, as I said, at the operational rather than control level. So this is roughly what a service management system looks like, although I appreciate this won't make perfect sense for many of you right now, but it gives you an idea of how it's structured. For your reference later, we have some definitions here for policy, for process, and for procedure. But if you just try and remember these three levels, that gives you a good idea of how these things work. But I said that really the engine of all of this was the processes. So the processes that we see in EOSC Hub, in the SMS that we're providing, are these. There are 14 of them. Right at the top, you can see service portfolio management. So this is what I deal with on a day-to-day basis. This is trying to capture the services that we provide, to have good information about them, to make strategic decisions about what should be provided and how. We'll also touch briefly on service level management, which is where we deal with agreements for services like SLAs, which I mentioned earlier. And often, classically, you talk about service catalogs here as well. I won't go through all the others, but I'll just point out incident and service request management. This is something familiar to many people because this is essentially how your help desk operates. So even if the terminology is a little different, most of the things here are things you will all be doing in your organizations, whether or not you use those terms for them and whether or not you break it down in this way. But this is the process model that we're using within the EOSC Hub. How do these processes then relate to each other? Don't worry, these next slides I'm not going to go through in lengthy detail, but this is just an example of how these interactions can work. So if you see here in the sort of upper left of this diagram, there's a box SPM. This is Service Portfolio Management. This is what I deal with. It generates a service portfolio. This is this box SP, which is then an input to the next process, Service Level Management, which I mentioned, which generates a service catalog and SLAs. And from SLAs, there are many interactions with other processes. So there is a logical connection between all of these processes. It's not just a list of things. It's just hard to capture them all on one slide. In fact, I'll show you very briefly. This is some of the other processes. This is the more operational ones. So we have incident management at the top left and how it relates to problem management, and then configuration and change management on the right side, and then release management. So again, I don't expect you to understand all of this straight away if you don't have a background in it, but this is the kind of thing we're talking about. How do we build management structures which allow us to deliver value in our services and to support others in delivering value in their services for the benefit of researchers? Right, I think we're done with this sort of education part of the talk. Let's talk a little bit about EOSC Hub. And I think there's one thing that we have to start with. Projects don't normally create service management systems. This is the first one that I know that has. Service management systems are large, complex structures which take a lot of time and effort to produce, and typically there's something provided by service providers rather than projects. But we are not a typical project in EOSC Hub. Basically, EOSC Hub is trying to form an early version of what will become a mature European open science cloud in the future. Exactly when this will happen depends on many things which are not to do with our project. Specifically, it's more at the governance level, how the European Commission decide to pursue these projects. But it's coming, and there are many, many projects that contribute to it. However, I think we are probably the largest implementation project for bringing together services and customers from different areas and trying to glue them together. So, like I said before, we are perhaps a beta test for a lot of important elements of a future mature EOSC. As part of that, one thing we're very aware of is that some level of service management and service management system will be needed if we want to have high quality services which we can manage, make promises about, optimize over time. And doing this after everything is already assembled is not very effective. This is something which I've seen many times in other organizations. If you try and build a service management system when you're already a mature organization, it is much, much more difficult. It's much more costly and time consuming. You have resistance from people who've got used to doing things a certain way. You have resistance from customers who don't necessarily like that things are changing, even if the changes are to their benefit. And well, as a colleague of mine rather brilliantly put it, it's like trying to change the tires on your bus while you're driving down the highway. You can do it, but it's extremely hard. Instead, if you can start with a service management system at the beginning when you're forming things, it's much easier to do, and it can start relatively small and grow with your organization, with your service provider group, into something more mature. And that's what we're trying to do. So we start this service management system. We hope, and I think assume, that it will be taken up by future projects that support EOSC after EOSC Hub has concluded at the end of 2020. And we hope and kind of fairly confident that it will be either taken up in a mature EOSC or taken as a major input in whatever the final EOSC service management system becomes. How this transition happens is up to the EOSC governance level and their interactions with the European Commission. So it's not for us to provide a final determination, but we want to give something that's as high quality and useful as possible, that can be an input to their work and that they can benefit from as much as possible. And in fact, I think this is reflected in the first review that we had of EOSC Hub, where we were told that this service management system was the most significant result of the project. I am certainly very happy to hear this. I think we have many, many strong results from this project, but I'm glad to see that the European Commission and that our reviewers recognize there's value in these SMSs. Certainly, when I first started talking about service management in this community, this would not have been the case. And I think this really shows the cultural change that has been going on. Lastly, and I'll mention this, the way we form our service management system is based on a standard called FitSM. FitSM is a little bit unusual. I'll just talk about it a bit now. So this is a standard that I was involved in producing, which is I think why I've ended up with this role many years later. It was created by a European Commission funded project under FP7 called FedSM, to try and form a version of IT service management which was really accessible to a wider range of people. We specifically wanted to support federation and the research community, but in fact, we also support SMEs, startups, many people who aren't served by other IT service management approaches. Other approaches can be very heavyweight. They can assume a lot that isn't true for our community because they were largely formatted for big, complicated telecommunications firms initially, although they spread to many places since then. And they have a lot of value, but they're not easy to implement. FitSM was intended to be the lightweight version, and I think it's about as lightweight as you can be and still be useful. If you take anything else out, it wouldn't hold together anymore. It's unusual in that it's released under a Creative Commons license, so you don't have to pay for any of the core materials. And even the versions of these sort of standards from the International Standardization Organization, ISO, you still have to pay for them. You still have to pay for the right to look at the standards and to share it with your colleagues. That's not the case here. It's also operated by a non-profit, which took it over after the EC project, which backed it. And certification against FitSM is offered by a couple of organizations, including APMG, who are a really major player in this world. They're a commercial organization, but they provide the certification services together with FitSM. Right, so that's what we're trying to produce and why. How does this fit into the larger EOSC picture? This diagram that I'm showing you now was created by Tina Kupila-Rantala at CSC as part of the EOSC Hub strategy work, and is an attempt to capture the model we're being shown for EOSC in the future from the European Commission in their working documents. As you can see, there is something called the EOSC Service Portfolio in pale blue, which is the term that's being used to capture all of the services that we offer to the research community. These include both thematic services, which go to a specific community, and common services that can be used by really any community, things like data management, visualization. But it also includes something called the federating core, and this maps closely to a lot of the elements of this hub that we were talking about earlier. So I just have to go on my animation. As I said, we have the service portfolio, the EOSC service portfolio at the top, and then within this federating core, we have another portfolio called the hub portfolio. These are also IT services, but these are the ones which glue together the hub of, or the federating core of EOSC and are not really always going to be visible to researchers. These are things like AAI, the marketplace at EOSC Portal, which I think most of you will know about, common help desks, common tools for managing collaborations and federations, and these have a high value as well. So EOSC Hub as a project is trying to help build this EOSC and this federating core, and it does this in part by providing services into this hub portfolio and integrating them such that they are available to glue the hub together, and also, as we'll see, they have another purpose as well. And at the same time, we try and create an EOSC service portfolio, an early version of it certainly, by both taking the services from our partners within the project, but more significantly from taking the services from the wider community and, as we say, onboarding them into the EOSC service portfolio. Basically capturing data about them so that they can be exposed through EOSC and through the EOSC portal to the research communities. As I said, there's another relationship here, which is that this hub portfolio, these internal services, are also made available to the external services to be integrated. Well, we'll mention this a little bit in the next slide as well, why they might want to do this. But so this hub portfolio has a dual purpose. But in this kind of world, EOSC Hub is essentially trying to populate two service portfolios, one of internal services, one of external services. The internal ones mostly from our partners right now, although in the long term this will have to be from lots of other people. The external services in the EOSC service portfolio, not just from us, but from the community as a whole. So if we want to onboard a service into this EOSC service portfolio, from the point of view of a provider, how does this look? So I've started with a generic made-up service, ACS, a chemistry service, since I came from biochemistry in the first place. They have decided they want to be visible through EOSC, so they need to work out how do they do this. Their first port of call is going to be EOSC Portal. So this is the EOSC Portal. It's a website which is a collaboration between EOSC Hub and people from some other projects like OpenAir and eInfra Central, and is already a shared endeavor to expose services to the community, and has a place where you can request to be onboarded into these portfolios. So they will request onboarding through a web form, and they will get in touch likely with EOSC Hub. We're the people who are doing the onboarding to this EOSC service portfolio right now, although this is something which is going to be increasingly in collaboration with others. This is already planned for the end of this year. So they will be sent some templates. The templates are pretty clear spreadsheets with a whole load of guidance on how they're filled in. We will ask them to fill in this information so that it's clear to customers and researchers what it is they want to offer. This will then be validated. So the validation is currently being carried out by us within EOSC Hub. We have a set of what are called rules of participation. So these are the minimum things we ask of a service provider in order to be a part of this portfolio. And most of it is just information. We would like to understand enough about the service that we can list it and that we can make it clear to researchers. There are also some rules about, for instance, how mature services should be. We don't currently accept very early stage alpha services. We're trying to make sure that there is some quality filter, that there are only services which are really useful to researchers at a reasonable scale. But our rules of participation are really quite lightweight and permissive. There will, in the long run, probably be other rules which come from this EOSC governance layer, which is the groups mandated by the European Commission to oversee EOSC. But this is a process which is only just starting. There is a working group on this which will provide recommendations towards the end of the year. We await to see what are the requirements they will put on providers. I'm sure they will all be reasonable. There's a lively discussion there about what exactly they should be. But for now, basically, we check that the data you provide us makes sense, is correct, is reasonably of good quality to show to researchers, and that it meets the minimum requirements that we have agreed as it stands. The next stage is service integration, and this is certainly optional, and this is where the Hub portfolio comes in, as well as actually other sources I can mention. This is something which I've had just this week with a service we were onboarding. There was a service which seems to be incredibly mature and really, really effective. But one of the things we asked people is, where is your help desk? And when we asked where the help desk was, they gave us a link to a GitHub page, which was for the development of the software they use in their service. Now, this is a great thing to provide. It's fantastic that people can make suggestions on the development of their service and their software, but it's not a help desk. And they don't really want to set up their own help desk, buy another piece of technology, work out how to use it. So instead, one option they have is to take one of the services within the Hub portfolio, these internal services, and integrate it into their service. So in this case, they are considering taking the central EOSC Hub provided help desk and having just a part of it that operates for their service. So they would still staff it. They're the ones who are the experts, but we would provide the service to them, the platform for running their help desk. And this makes life much easier for them. There are cost savings because we can provide this in common with other people. And in the long run, if lots of people take on these components, it will be better for customers as well, because they will have a consistent experience no matter which service they're using. Other options might be AI. So there are a number of federated AI solutions which can be taken, which would help people access the services and might be common across lots and lots of different EOSC services. Much like many people quite like using Google logins to other third-party services because it's more convenient, using shared EOSC level or currently EOSC Hub provided AI is something that could be really, really valuable and nice for researchers and make life easier for providers as well. I'd also like to point out that earlier on when I talked about the EOSC Service Portfolio, I said there were thematic and also common services. There are also common services you could integrate here. These are not ones that are subject to the service management system. They're offered by third parties, but there are lots of other technologies and components and services that could be integrated to save service providers in a specific area from having to reinvent the wheel constantly. So this is a real way we add value as part of EOSC and EOSC Hub. Then once all of that is done, the service enters the portfolio. In this case, I've said it's entered the EOSC Service Portfolio as a thematic service, since it's a chemistry service. And then after this, there is some final kind of touches before it is published in our service catalog, which is currently the marketplace on the EOSC portal. There are, in fact, a couple of ways that the services are currently being shown on EOSC portal, but all of these are currently coalescing, and certainly later in this year, people could expect to see a single list of services, despite the fact that data will be drawn from a whole load of different backends. So this is what the kind of life cycle looks like for onboarding a service. And it took me a while to talk about, but it's not as complicated as it looks. I also want to mention, in all of this, where is the service management system that we just talked about? And hopefully this will show you how, as a provider, you might touch on this service management system. Well, the first thing to state is that the provider processes, how you manage your services internally, whether it's with IT service management or more informally, we don't touch those. Those are still yours. It's not our place to tell you how to run things. It might be that you want to change how you run things based on things that you experience in dealing with us, but that's your decision as a provider. However, as you are onboarded, you will be touching on our service portfolio management and probably service level management processes, because this is what's controlling this onboarding process, or rather than controlling, managing, doing the daily work to keep this running. Then if you choose to do any of the integration, you might run into some of our more operational processes, but you will only run into them based on which components you interact with. If you interact with our help desk, you'll basically run into our incident and service request management process, because this is a process which essentially runs help desks. If you use our AAI, you might run into information security management. And if you deal with accounting, you might deal with configuration management or perhaps change management as well. But this is, as I said, optional. And then at the other end, once things are in the catalog, service order and customer relationship management you'll probably touch on, because if customers are ordering services through EOSC portal, there will be some level of coordination to make that experience good for customers, which you'll see. But then the major point where we will touch on each other's service management systems will be around this service integration, as I said. So I don't have too many more slides, but I just want to show you what is in these portfolios right now. I'll give you some idea at least. Within the EOSC portfolio, EOSC Service Portfolio, these are just the categories of kinds of service. compute, data management, networking, processing, etc. We can look at them in a little bit more detail in a second. But as I said, these are not provided by us as EOSC Hub. We contribute some services, but increasingly they're onboarded. I think we have 75, 77 services now onboarded from the community, with lots more in the pipeline. So this is really representing what a whole community does, not just us. The Hub service portfolio, on the other hand, this is the internal services which glue together the federation. These I can be a bit more specific. The current services we see are AAI, helpdesks, accounting. CMDB is a configuration management database. This is quite a technical part of IT service management, so I won't go into it here. Monitoring is something we have to do internally, but can also offer to others. We have a tool coming up to manage service portfolios. We have EOSC Portal itself. The technology around EOSC Portal is part of the Hub service portfolio, and the platforms which enable the collaboration around our federation. So this is what's in these two portfolios in general, but to give you some idea of what's in the EOSC service portfolio, the external services, I just pulled a couple out from today. So here we have CS Rosetta. So this is a thematic service which predicts protein structures from NMR data. And this is from the guys in Utrecht. This is part of the WeNMR community, which is a big community within EOSC. So this is one external services. DPAS training facility, I actually onboarded this one pretty recently. This is a common service. This is not for a specific community, but is a distributed training facility for machine learning, artificial intelligence, and deep learning models. So they have a way to basically train your machine learning systems using their experience. This could be used by anyone who wants to use these techniques with their data, whatever the discipline. I quite like the look of this one, on-demand operational coastal circulation forecast service. This is from the Portuguese National Civil Engineering Laboratory. So I think this is a service which is predicting coastal tidal patterns, basically. So this is for the environmental engineering community. So this is a thematic service, as is the last one. This one's also rather interesting. This is a service which provides on-demand processing for responses to earthquakes and landslides. So when you need to do really urgent data analysis to understand the impact of an earthquake or a landslide, these are the guys to talk to. This is provided by Terradue, who I think are a commercial provider as well. So that's quite interesting. There are commercial providers or provision for them within EOSC. So this gives you an idea of the breadth of service that we're seeing in the service portfolio. And then, and this is my last slide, just to return to these two portfolios, what is the value they provide? So the EOSC service portfolio is the researcher-facing services, both the thematic and the common services. For the providers, it's providing exposure of services, so they're going to be able to get to their customers more effectively, and the opportunity to integrate with these shared components, both the ones in the Hub portfolio and also in the common services, so they can add value to their services and save themselves effort, not reinvent the wheel. For the researchers, it's a single location to seek many different services they may not have previously been able to get to. It provides a consistent description of them, a clear comparison. It tells you something about their maturity. It tells you something about their about how they can be compared and how perhaps in the future they could also be composed. This is something which is not yet there, but as these services are increasingly integrated, hopefully in the future, EOSC will provide a way that you can plug services together rather than just access them and order them. On the other side, the Hub service portfolio, this is really there to provide these common services and components which empower the federation, which is this Hub, which is part of this EOSC federating core. For the Hub operators like us and the people who will be running these functions for the federating core later, it glues the federation together. For the providers, it provides these reusable components and it saves them internal work and offers a better user experience. So this is pretty much the end of my talk, but just to sum up before we go to the Q&A, what we're talking about here is a service management system, which is this mediation layer between customers and providers. And our attempt as EOSC Hub to provide an early version of this that can support and be taken up by a mature EOSC so that they don't have to do it themselves later, so that it's already there in place as this system grows, which provides this glue between providers and customers and operators, which supports these different portfolios, which has a structure to manage things, to make sure that the quality of services is there, to make sure that things can really be understood, managed, optimized over time. And with a particular focus, as we've talked about today, on these two portfolios, the EOSC Service Portfolio, where we are onboarding providers, hopefully some of you in the call today, to expose these services to the outside world, and the Hub portfolio, which is this internal glue. So that's where I will stop with the presentation, and I guess I will pass back to Rob so we can talk about the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Owen, for your insightful presentation. Now I would like to open the floor to questions. So in the sidebar, just raise your hand. Once unmuted, please identify yourself to help contextualize your questions for our panelists, and then state your question. Please keep any follow-up questions to only one to give chance for the others. So we're open to questions. Questions from the audience?
Just while they're doing that, Rob, I just want to mention that apart from myself and Diego Scardacci, who you heard earlier, we also have Małgorzata Krakowian, who is the SMS owner for EOSC Hub. So she's the boss of all of the service management activities and keeps an eye and keeps us all pointing in the right direction. So she will probably be very, very helpful in answering questions. Just thought I would mention she was here.
Thank you very much. So we have our first question from Toby Rodwell. Toby, I'm unmuting you right now. Please introduce yourself and state your question.
Yes, thanks very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Super. Yeah. So this is Toby Rodwell, Head of Service Management at Géant. And thanks very much for that. Very interesting, very informative, and very clear. Are you able to expand a little bit on the help desk? As I understand it, you're saying this is an optional model that a new service provider may use if they don't have their own system in place. I understood it's like a module. I think you said that they'll be expected to staff it, they'd have to provide their own subject matter experts, as they were understandably so. But or is it just a concept at the moment, and you haven't some sort of fleshed out exactly what it would be?
Well, this is in the process of being formed, but is already being asked for. So this is a good moment to answer the question, I think. So within EOSC Hub, we have a number of different provider groups. We have people from Indigo, from EUDAT, and from EGI, all communities that were already operational beforehand. They all have their own help desk solutions. We have a federated layer which bridges all of them, which is called XGUS. So this is basically a version of GGUS, which I'm sure will be aware of. So we already have XGUS, which can plug together different help desks. We have two things that we can offer to service providers if they're interested. One is they can connect their own help desk to XGUS such that users can go through XGUS rather than having to go directly to them, if that's of interest to them because they have users who are using lots of different services. We can also create within XGUS a support unit for them so that they don't have to deploy the software, understand how it's used, etc. In this case, yes, they're the subject matter experts, so they're going to have to provide staff unless there is some other agreement, but I don't think, as I understand it, this is what we're foreseeing for now. For now, we're foreseeing for smaller providers, they essentially can have help desk platform as a service, where they can answer the questions, but they don't have to just set up an email, which I don't think is ideal for mature services, or get into deploying Zendesk or something for themselves. So it's added value for them, and it's a benefit for us because it helps us see that their maturity is growing as they use these services. So like I said, we had a request for this 2 days ago, I think. How it's deployed is, well, we know it. There's probably a little bit more documentation that's needed because this package approach is just really being deployed now, but it's a real thing, not just an idea.
Great, thanks so much.
Does anyone else want to mention anything on that? Małgorzata or Diego? No?
No, I think you clearly explained the current situation. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much. That was Toby from Géant. Is there anyone else who has any questions for our panelists today? I see we have a question from Arnaud. I'm going to unmute now. Please introduce yourself and state your question.
Hello, so I'm Arnaud Jangog. I'm working for OPRAS, Research Infrastructure, and we have started working with EGI in the recent weeks, and so thank you for the presentation and useful work. I wanted to know how we should manage many services with the service management system, because in OPRAS we will provide many services which will be rather different, and I was wondering if we should have one single service management system, or a service management system which is distributed from which has the adaptations for each one of the services. I hope my question is very clear, but
no, I get it. It's fine. Okay. Yeah, you don't deploy a service management system for a single service typically, unless it's the only service that you provide. So one service management system will suffice for any number of services. There are some very large companies where they may consider having separate service management systems, but typically this is where you have operations across different countries or continents, or you provide incredibly different kinds of services. So Yamaha, for instance, they provide cars and musical instruments. If they were to have a service management system, I doubt they could accommodate both in one, because they would be so different. But if you're providing a range of IT services to the research community, one service management system is easily enough. And you don't have to do it all at once. This is really an important lesson to take away. You start with a few processes. Over time, you build and deploy more. The EOSC Hub SMS is not complete. There are some processes which are really quite skeletal, but they're the ones which are not needed so urgently. Service portfolio management pretty much always is where you're going to start. So this is one of definitely the more mature processes we have. And this is a pattern I see again and again across providers. So don't be too intimidated by the scale of the work. It comes in digestible chunks, basically, but only one service management system will suffice.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from the audience? I see we have Karsten Thiel. You're now unmuted. Please introduce yourself and state your question.
Yeah, this is Karsten Thiel from Sester Erik. We're one of the infrastructures who is interested in providing thematic services, as you mentioned. We're already in contact with EGI, with Giant on these topics. So for us, for me, the most interesting thing was you mentioned that the process, you submit the service through the form, and then you start about service integration. So for me, the interesting question is there, because when I first saw the submission form a few months ago, it said, please provide your terms of service, your service level agreements, and so on. So is there some kind of training on how to improve service management for us? I know that there are some FitSM trainings sometimes attached to conferences, but how do you propose for us as infrastructures to get more into the service management and to use these tools?
So maybe I can start, and then maybe Magdalena can talk, or Diego can talk more afterwards. It's a clear question. It's an important question to ask. As EOSC Hub, or from my point of view as EGI, we can't push IT service management for you in your organization. One of the things that's most important about deploying IT service management is that you start with real buy-in from your top management. So if there is a real desire to manage services in a more professional way, not just in order to work with EOSC, but just to improve your services, which is, I think, a really good idea, then yeah, you need to get an agreement from that internally, and then from that we can see how we move on. There is FitSM training available, funded through EOSC Hub. This is not a huge amount. It's quite a lot, but it won't cover everyone in the whole of the organization. Beyond that, there would be probably a need to have some sort of paid training. There are many IT service management standards you can be trained in, and many providers. Obviously, FitSM is what EOSC Hub is using. EGI provides FitSM training services. There are others who provide FitSM training services as well, so I don't want this to just be seen as an advert for my own organization, because the priority for us in this is making sure that you have the information rather than you necessarily have it from us, although obviously I'd be happy to provide you training if you'd like. Beyond that, you probably need some sort of fairly lightweight initial consultancy on how to get started. I don't think you need consultancy the whole way through the cycle of deployment, but right at the start it can be really helpful. And then as you develop the capacities of your internal staff, they can take over a lot of the roles and the responsibilities for implementing IT service management. So I guess from an EOSC level, by doing this, by deploying an SMS, we are trying to encourage people to ask exactly the question you're asking. How do we then improve our own services to match and interact with other services in the EOSC landscape? There are many resources available. We can provide some links to some later. And I'm always happy to talk over this offline if you would like to pursue training either through EOSC Hub or separately. But it's not a question I can entirely answer because implementation varies depending on where it is, basically. I don't know the precise conditions within your Erik. Magajata, do you want to say anything else on this topic?
I don't think. I think everything is you've covered. If there's more questions or something is unclear, I can join and go into more details.
I would also say that when we talk about integration, it's optional. So the more you integrate, the more service management system we would expect you to have. If it's just listing the service, what we're expecting isn't so much, actually.
So about integration, we are right now in a stage of defining and trying to understand how not only technical, but also from the process point of view, how the integration could look like, what kind of packages and what kind of options the providers would like to see the EOSC or EOSC Hub to provide. So this is being defined right now. And it's not only about the technical integration, and we are looking at the options. So right now the option is to be listed in the marketplace so that the customers, the users can find you and order your services. We are also looking into other options like reusing our monitoring, accounting, help desk we already talked about. So this is right now we are looking into those options, and of course what could be interesting and for the providers, not only what we can provide, but what could be interesting for the providers.
Right. Thank you very much, Mal, for that, and Owen. We're still open for questions. If the audience has any more questions, just please raise your hand and let us know. Any other questions from the audience? You can also type it in the chat. Yeah, go ahead.
While they're thinking, just to add something which maybe helps. This is a work in progress. So these processes were started at the start of the project and are developing through the project, as Magajata said. So if there's anything which you find difficult or challenging here that you don't think is going to work well for you, please let us know. You know, we welcome feedback on how we are doing the onboarding, on how we're offering integration with our services, on how we're supporting IT service management development, as was just asked in the last question. And in fact, I think this is something we all need to think about also for the next round of funding calls that we're all going to go into. One other thing that's important if you want to develop service management is build some funding for that into your future projects, either funding for external training or for including partners who have expertise in it already, or for interacting with the other things that are going on. But plan this into your future resource needs, because I think that's quite an important thing, a first step, if we want to encourage the whole community to become more mature.
Thank you very much, Owen. We have a question from Cy Holsinger. I am unmuting you, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, I just wanted to basically double check to see if this was going to be made available online afterwards, and if so, where?
Do you mean the slides, or?
Yeah, I think this was written, the slides and the recording, I think, right?
Yes. Yeah. So the slides and the webinar recording will be on the event page on the EOSC Hub website. Let me just paste the link. Just a second.
Rob, this is Diego. I'd like to add then, following up the side questions, then next week we will start also a feedback collection of what Owen presented. So we will provide you with a brief document plus a short questionnaire, so you can provide your feedback on the current status of the proposed EOSC SMS and the onboarding process described by Owen. And we will take into account on the evolution of the systems that we will undertake in the coming months. I would underline that the basic principle behind what Owen showed you is the flexibility. So our provider is free to choose the level of integration with the EOSC and the EOSC Service Management System. So we can have a very low level of integration with our providers only listed in the service catalog and exposed in the EOSC portal. And in this case, the service provider doesn't require to have any particular knowledge of IT service management. I would say only some really basic information that are the information needed to fill in the template, or otherwise the provider can decide to have a tighter integrations. So in this case, there are more requirements, but in this case, if the provider decides to follow this way, EOSC Hub, if needed, can provide support. So we have dedicated activity on FitSM training. So we have some trainings that are funded directly by the project. We can also provide the consultants if needed. So if the case our provider is willing, or our research infrastructure is willing to increase its awareness of service management system, EOSC Hub can support this actor on this. So as said by Owen, to reply to Carsten as well, we would be happy to have offline discussion on this, provide suggestions, and trying to find a more effective way for a provider to know more about the service management system and to increase the quality, so to increase the quality of the service they are providing.
Thank you very much. I agree with you. And I also wanted to add, this is why I pulled this slide up. I mean, we talked about the SMS. I really only focused on this top process here, service portfolio management, because this is what a lot of you hopefully will be interacting with through the onboarding. As I said, well, there are 14 processes and there are many interactions between the processes. We really only dealt with perhaps this part today. So I don't expect that we could answer all your questions about service management systems. Please do get in touch if you would like more information, either in the form of training or maybe future webinars as well, if there are particular topics that people would like to understand more about. I had to pitch this at a relatively high level. Obviously, we could go into this for days and days if we had time and there was interest, but I don't want to waste your time if it's not relevant to you. But maybe this is something that we're very welcome to receive in the feedback. What other topics around this area are particularly of interest for you?
Thank you very much. Now let's open the floor to more questions. Are there any further questions from the audience? Seems there aren't any anymore. So if there aren't any questions, I think we can close here. So thank you all for your questions and the discussion and your interest in EOSC Hub. As we said earlier, the slides and the webinar recording will be published on the webinar event page on the EOSC Hub's website within the week. So I posted that in the chat box for everyone. But this can also be found by going to the EOSC Hub website and going to the events section and clicking past events. Just for your information as well, tomorrow we will also have another webinar called an EOSC Hub proposal for the EOSC technical architecture at the exact same time at 11 a.m. CEST. Details can be found in the EOSC Hub website events section. Any other parting words perhaps from Owen?
Just thank you all for attending. I hope this was useful to you. I hope it was interesting. I hope to hear lots from you after and offline as well. Please do feel free to get in touch. Actually, my email is not included here, but owen.appleton@egi.eu will definitely get to me, or you can contact us through any of the other project routes that I'm sure you have available to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Owen. Diego, any parting words for our audience?
I would like only to thank you everybody that attended this webinar and expressed interest in this topic, and we are looking forward to hear your feedback on this.
Excellent. Okay, so once again, thank you all, 44 of you, for joining us today, and see you in our future engagement activities. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.